I dedicated almost 10 years of my life to my parents' business, pouring in every ounce of energy I had. From managing contracts to training employees, I did every task with meticulous attention, often staying late into the night, thinking I was building something lasting. Not just for myself, but for the family I loved. My parents praised my work in passing, always with a smile that felt genuine, or so I thought. One rainy Thursday, I was called into the office. My heart sank before I even opened the door. My father, sitting behind the same mahogany desk I'd spent countless hours at, looked up at me with a neutral expression. "We need to talk," he said. My mother was sitting beside him, clutching a cup of tea as if to soothe herself. I smiled nervously, expecting perhaps a discussion about a promotion or a new responsibility. Instead, I was handed a letter. My own handwriting on the envelope seemed mocking, though I hadn't written it. I tore it open and scanned the words. "We are letting you go," my father said, his voice calm, almost clinical. Shock froze me. I blinked. The air seemed to thicken around me. "Wait, what? Why? You're not aligned with the company's vision anymore." My mother interrupted, her tone polite but distant. "We think it's best you pursue opportunities elsewhere." I looked at my brother, lounging lazily in the corner, scrolling through his phone, completely unaffected. He had contributed barely anything over the past few years, yet he was untouched. No one handed him a letter. No one asked him to leave. "Years of my life, my work," I stammered. My voice shook. "All of it gone?" "You'll understand someday," my father replied, already turning back to his computer, signaling the end of the conversation. I walked out, stunned, my hands trembling, the rain outside mirroring the turmoil inside me. That was the day I vowed I would never depend on their validation again. That day, I realized loyalty isn't always rewarded, and sometimes, hard work is just fuel for someone else's convenience. In the years that followed, I built my own company from the ground up. Every mistake I'd seen my parents make, I learned to avoid. Every lesson I'd absorbed through pain and observation became a weapon in my arsenal. Slowly, methodically, I began to climb the ranks of the business world, fueled by the sting of betrayal and the desire to prove that I could thrive without them. Then, one morning, I received a call that would change everything. My parents' business was failing, drowning in debt, struggling to meet payroll, and hemorrhaging clients. The same company that had once been my life was collapsing, and the irony was almost poetic. I could step in and save them, or I could let them face the consequences of their choices. The decision I was about to make would test everything I believed about family, loyalty, and justice. After being fired, I felt a mixture of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. But for the first time in years, I also felt clarity. If my parents couldn't see my value, I would create a place where hard work and dedication were rewarded, not ignored. I rented a small office with peeling wallpaper, signed a lease on a tiny copier that jammed constantly, and began building my company from scratch. The early days were brutal. I worked 16-hour days, balancing client meetings, product development, and customer service. I made mistakes, many of them, but I learned faster than anyone else, absorbing lessons from every misstep. Slowly, my reputation grew. People started noticing my reliability, my precision, and the fact that I delivered on promises when others failed. Unlike my parents' company, I didn't rely on favoritism or blind trust. I hired people based on talent and attitude, not family ties or past connections. I encouraged creativity and innovation, fostering an environment where people weren't afraid to fail because failure became a lesson rather than a mark of shame. The office transformed from a cramped, chaotic space into a buzzing hub of activity and ambition. Within a few years, we landed contracts that my parents' company had lost due to mismanagement. I watched competitors stumble while my small team consistently outperformed larger, more established firms. Each success stoked a quiet sense of satisfaction, a silent acknowledgement that the work I had poured into my parents' business had not been wasted. I had applied it to something that respected my effort. The irony wasn't lost on me. I remembered late nights working in my parents' office, preparing spreadsheets and proposals, while my brother played video games and wandered in and out of meetings. Now, I was the one making decisions that affected dozens of employees and hundreds of clients, all while my parents' company floundered without the structure and diligence I had once provided. People began to approach me, asking for advice, investment, or collaboration. I had become someone they trusted implicitly, a stark contrast to the family I had left behind. And yet, despite all the progress, I couldn't escape the lingering resentment. Every time I passed by a familiar street, I remembered walking out of my parents' office that rainy afternoon, fists clenched and heart racing with frustration. Then came the call that changed everything. My father's voice sounded strained, almost unrecognizable. We might need your help," he said. My stomach dropped. I learned that their company was now months behind on payments, contracts were being canceled, and employees were quitting en masse. The same company that had once been my life was on the brink of collapse, and I was uniquely positioned to intervene. For the first time, I realized the magnitude of my choices. I could step in, save them, and become the hero of the family narrative. Or I could let them face the consequences of their decisions, letting the company, and maybe my parents' pride, fall apart. The moral dilemma gnawed at me. Loyalty versus justice. Family versus self-respect. Love versus anger. I hung up the phone and stared at the skyline from my office. The city shimmered with possibilities, and yet my mind was consumed by a single question. Did I owe them anything after they had discarded me so easily? And if I did intervene, what would it truly cost me? Not in money, but in principle, in dignity, in the sense of who I had become. The days after that call felt surreal. I kept checking news about the industry, trying to piece together just how badly my parents' company was failing. Every update was worse than the last. Suppliers were threatening legal action, long-term clients were canceling contracts, and former employees were posting vague but worrying comments on social media. Their empire, the one I had poured my life into years ago, was unraveling in real time. It was hard not to feel satisfaction. I won't lie. Seeing them struggle stirred a mix of emotions I didn't expect. Vindication, frustration, and yes, a quiet sense of triumph. But beneath that, a heavier feeling lingered. It wasn't enough for me to simply watch them fall. I felt a personal tug, a remnant of loyalty, or maybe the memory of the child who had once believed family always meant support. Then came the messages. Employees I had known personally reached out. Some were frantic, unsure of what to do next. Others were angry, blaming management for the sudden instability. And then there were whispers from clients, confused and disappointed that projects were delayed or canceled entirely. I realized the ripple effect of my parents' failures went far beyond my own resentment. One evening, as I sat in my office, my phone buzzed with a message from a longtime client of my parents' company. "We're at risk if they can't deliver. Can your team help us?" I hesitated. This was my opportunity to step in professionally, maybe even leverage the situation to benefit my own company. But part of me recoiled. The same parents who had dismissed my years of effort were now indirectly asking me to rescue them through my employees' work. Was it right? Was it manipulation? Or was it just desperate survival instinct from people who had once been my heroes? At night, memories flooded back. The countless late nights at their office, the promotions that never came, the constant comparisons to my brother, who had barely done anything. I remembered the sting of their casual dismissal, the way my achievements were overlooked, the way loyalty had counted for nothing. It was all fresh, almost painful in its clarity. Still, another voice whispered, "Maybe people make mistakes. Maybe families deserve a second chance." I found myself torn between two worlds, the rational, calculated business mind I had honed, and the emotional child I had once been. Could I forgive them? Could I save them? Or would doing so just allow them to repeat the same mistakes, while my sense of justice went unfulfilled? By the following week, things escalated. I started getting calls from former employees, desperate for guidance, hints of lawsuits, and rumors that the board of directors was considering selling the company to a competitor. Every piece of news felt like a test. It was no longer just a family problem, it was a community problem, one that I could intervene in or let collapse entirely. And in that moment, I realized, My next move would define not just the company's future, but my own principles. Could I let anger dictate my actions, or would I rise above it? Every instinct screamed for retribution, yet every lesson I'd learned told me to be strategic, to think carefully, to weigh the consequences. I stared at the ceiling that night, thinking about the years of hard work I had lost to their indifference. I thought about the employees who trusted me, the clients who counted on my integrity, and the sibling who had benefited from laziness while I had been cast aside. Somewhere in the mix of resentment and responsibility, a plan began to form, but I wasn't ready to act yet. I needed more information. I needed to understand just how deep the rot went. Little did I know, the next few days would bring more revelations than I had bargained for. Secrets, betrayals, and a confrontation that would force me to decide. Save them, or let the empire I helped build collapse forever. Started with a knock at the door of my office. My assistant looked puzzled as I opened it to find my father and mother standing there. Expressions tight, almost defensive. Behind them, my brother leaned casually against the wall, arms crossed, smirking as if this were some kind of game. I motioned for them to sit, though the room felt suddenly smaller, heavier with tension. I didn't think you'd respond, my father said, shifting in his seat. We didn't mean to bother you, but things are complicated. Complicated? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. You mean you're weeks behind on payroll, clients are leaving, and your employees are threatening legal action? That's complicated? My mother opened her mouth, then closed it, as if reconsidering how much honesty she could risk. My brother leaned back, scrolling on his phone, clearly unconcerned about the gravity of the situation. I felt a familiar surge of anger. Years of watching him coast while I worked tirelessly flashed vividly in my mind. You have to understand, my father continued. We've always tried to keep the family together. Sometimes decisions are difficult. I understand that you fired me for being too dedicated. I shot back. I understand that my brother, who contributed almost nothing, stayed. I understand that your idea of loyalty is completely one-sided. Do you really think you can explain that away now? My mother sighed. It wasn't personal. We just needed stability. We thought. Stability? I interrupted. You mean mediocrity. You preferred laziness over hard work. You dismissed me, the person who actually built the backbone of this company, for appearances and favoritism. And now you want me to fix it? The room went silent for a moment. My father's face tightened. My mother looked guilty. My brother looked amused, as if watching a spectacle. I realized they were trying to appeal to me, to guilt me into helping them, but I refused to let emotion cloud my judgment. This wasn't about forgiveness, it was about accountability. You want to know what's complicated? I said, leaning forward. It's that I have to choose between letting your bad decisions collapse your company, or stepping in and cleaning up a mess you created while pretending you're the victim. It's complicated because I still care enough not to let innocent employees suffer. But I also remember every time you threw me aside. Every time you dismissed me for nothing. My brother snorted. Come on, it's not that bad. You could help make it right. Don't be so dramatic. I froze. That casual dismissal, that same nonchalance I had seen for years, fueled a deeper fire inside me. I started but stopped. Words alone weren't enough. The memory of all the long nights, missed personal opportunities, and countless sacrifices slammed into me with full force. I didn't come here for drama, I said finally. I came here to understand the extent of your failures. And believe me, I've been taking notes. The tension in the room became almost unbearable. I realized this confrontation wasn't just about business. It was about reckoning. It was about laying bare the dynamics that had haunted my life for a decade. I could see it in their eyes, the subtle panic, the unease they tried to mask. They had underestimated me once. They were about to realize I was no longer a naive child eager for approval. By the end of the meeting, no decisions were made, no promises given. But a silent understanding hung in the air. I held the power now. And power, I knew, demanded a choice. Would I save them, forgive them, and restore the family business? Or would I let it crumble under the weight of their own negligence, proving that loyalty should be earned, not demanded? I walked them to the door, watching as they left. My brother shot me a look that tried to mock me, but I only felt calm, almost detached. Everything had shifted. I wasn't a pawn in their story anymore. I was the player controlling the board. And the game had just begun. After the confrontation, I couldn't sleep. My apartment felt smaller than ever, walls closing in with the weight of every decision I had ever made. Every lesson I had learned in business and in life collided with the raw emotions of betrayal, resentment, and a lingering sense of responsibility. I poured myself a glass of water, sat by the window, and stared at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, my parents' company was unraveling, piece by piece, and the question echoed in my mind. Do I intervene, or do I let them face the consequences of their choices? I thought about the employees, many of whom I had known personally. They trusted the company, depended on it for their livelihoods, and now faced the threat of unemployment and instability. I felt a pang of guilt. Could I really watch innocent people suffer because of my parents' failures? Was morality calling me to step in, even if it meant putting myself back in the orbit of the people who had hurt me so deeply? Then came the anger, simmering beneath the surface. Every memory of being dismissed, undervalued, and overlooked rose to the forefront. My brother, who had done nothing, was still enjoying comfort and security. My parents, the ones who had once depended on me, were now scrambling in desperation, and somehow expected me to forgive and forget. I clenched my fists. Loyalty, it seemed, had a price, and I was done paying it blindly. I spent hours analyzing every possible scenario. Step in, and they might survive, but at what cost to my pride, my sense of justice, and my own company? Let them fail, and the world would see the consequences of their decisions. But could I live with that? Could I look at my employees, my clients, my own reflection, and not feel some responsibility for the fallout? Every night, I replayed that fateful day when they fired me. I remembered the letter, the words, the casual dismissal, and the look on my brother's face. It had been more than rejection. It had been a lesson in how unfair life could be. And now life had handed me a similar power, the ability to choose their fate. I considered the possibility of a middle path, help them indirectly, restructure their company quietly, or take control without them knowing. But even that felt tainted. It would be a shadow of justice, a compromise that satisfied neither my sense of ethics nor my desire for accountability. As days turned into nights, I realized I wasn't just deciding the fate of a company. I was deciding the rules of my own life. Would I let resentment guide me, or would I rise above it? Could I forgive without forgetting? Could I protect others without protecting the ones who had betrayed me? In the quiet moments, I could hear their voices, their excuses, their justifications. But I could also hear my own, calm, rational, and resolute. I was no longer the child eager for approval. I was the architect of my destiny. The question wasn't just about them anymore. It was about who I had become, who I wanted to be, and how far I was willing to go to enforce justice, responsibility, and respect. By the end of the week, the moral dilemma was no longer theoretical. I had gathered enough information to act. I knew the depth of their failures, the potential consequences for employees and clients, and the options available to me. And as I stared at my reflection in the darkened window, I finally understood. The choice wasn't just theirs. It was mine. And whichever path I chose, nothing would ever be the same again. After days of internal debate, I realized the decision wasn't just about anger or resentment anymore. It was about strategy, consequences, and leverage. I had reached a point where emotion had to be tempered by logic. If I was going to act, I needed a plan that protected the innocent, ensured justice, and, most importantly, respected my own boundaries. I began by gathering data. Financial reports, pending contracts, employee feedback, and supplier accounts, all documents that painted the full picture of my parents' failing business. I discovered issues I hadn't anticipated. Several contracts were in jeopardy because of missed deadlines. A few key employees had left quietly, and some suppliers were threatening lawsuits for unpaid bills. The company was on the brink, and there was no way to fix it overnight. I considered my options. One path was to step in directly, offering a rescue package that could stabilize the company. That would require me to re-engage with my parents and the sibling I despised, to forgive past slights for the sake of pragmatism. Another path was to let the company fail, allowing a competitor to swoop in and absorb its assets. That would be cold, perhaps even ruthless, but it would also serve as a lesson in accountability. Then a third, more calculated option emerged. I could orchestrate a controlled acquisition. I had the means, through my own company, to buy their failing business quietly, restructure it, and secure the employees' jobs without exposing myself to direct confrontation. It was a way to both ensure that those who depended on the company were protected and to subtly assert the consequences of my parents' previous decisions. I weighed the ethics carefully. Was this revenge? Perhaps. But it was also justice, a strategic move that corrected systemic mismanagement while rewarding diligence and foresight. I drafted scenarios in my mind. If I intervened directly, my parents would claim gratitude and perhaps manipulate my forgiveness. If I did nothing, chaos would ensue, and the innocent would suffer. If I acted indirectly, I could protect the innocent, ensure accountability, and maintain my autonomy. I contacted a few trusted advisors, discreetly exploring the possibility of an acquisition. The numbers made sense. Even with the debt, the company had assets worth salvaging, a loyal customer base that could be retained, and employees who could be re-engaged under new management. It was feasible, and it would give me control over the outcome, without having to forgive or validate anyone who had hurt me in the past. Late at night, I sat in my office, reviewing the spreadsheets, projections, and legal documents. The plan was clear. Acquire the company under my control, restructure it efficiently, and protect the employees while allowing my parents to face the consequences of their mismanagement. I wouldn't humiliate them, but I wouldn't save them directly either. For the first time in years, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and apprehension. I was about to step into a role I had once dreamed of, not as a pawn in their story, but as the architect of its next chapter. And yet, a small voice inside me questioned whether I was crossing a moral line. Was this justice or calculated retribution? Could I reconcile my need for accountability with my desire to protect the innocent? I leaned back in my chair, looking at the city lights flickering beyond my window. The plan was set in motion, but execution would require patience, precision, and nerve. Every step had to be calculated, every word measured. And above all, I had to keep my own emotions in check. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The morning after finalizing the plan, I felt an unusual clarity. The path forward was set, and there was no room for hesitation. Every action, every email, every phone call had to be precise. I started by quietly contacting my legal team and financial advisors, outlining the acquisition process, ensuring every step complied with regulations while remaining confidential. I also reached out to former employees of my parents' company, those I trusted, to gauge loyalty, skill, and willingness to continue under new management. Their responses were cautious at first, tinged with uncertainty and worry, but soon their voices carried hope. They didn't know the full plan, nor did they need to. What mattered was their faith in my competence. Meanwhile, my parents remained unaware of the depth of my involvement. They were scrambling, contacting suppliers, begging clients to stay, and attempting to patch holes in a sinking ship. Every desperate phone call they made was a stark reminder of the consequences they had ignored for years. The irony was bitter, but it was theirs to taste. Negotiations began quietly with my advisors and the board members of my parents' company. I positioned my offer strategically, not out of malice, but to protect the company's integrity and the employees' livelihoods. The terms were fair yet decisive, ensuring the company would operate under new management without them interfering. My parents were presented with an option: sell quietly or face the collapse entirely. Their expressions when they realized the leverage I held were priceless. Shock, disbelief, and a hint of fear danced across their faces. Throughout the week, I orchestrated every detail meticulously. Contracts were reviewed and signed, finances were transferred, and key employees were reassured that their positions would remain secure. I watched the transition unfold like a chess game, each move calculated, each consequence anticipated. My parents tried subtle manipulations, pleading, bargaining, even threats, but I remained firm. I had learned long ago that emotion and sentiment were dangerous in business. I would not let them sway me. Then came the day of confrontation. My parents arrived at the office, expecting perhaps a discussion or a negotiation, only to find the deal already underway. Their realization hit slowly, like ice sliding down the spine. They were losing control, and there was nothing they could do to reverse it. My brother's smug grin faltered as he recognized that my calm demeanor was not just confidence, but power. The power they had never given me, the power they had dismissed, and the power I had now seized. In those moments, I felt an unexpected pang of emotion, neither triumph nor vengeance, but a quiet sense of justice. This wasn't about humiliating them. It was about establishing the consequences of their decisions. Years of mismanagement, favoritism, and neglect had brought them to this point. I simply ensured that those who relied on the company, employees, clients, and the community were protected. As the deal finalized, I took a step back and observed the ripple effect. Employees exhaled in relief, contracts were salvaged, and suppliers received payment assurances. The company, once teetering on the edge of collapse, was now stabilized under competent leadership. My parents, meanwhile, faced the reality of their actions, the consequences they had ignored for so long. I left the office that evening, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and calm. The plan had succeeded. I had protected the innocent, enforced accountability, and reclaimed the agency that had been stripped from me years ago. And yet, the moral question lingered. Had I acted out of justice, or had I allowed a part of my resentment to guide the process? In the quiet moments, I realized that the answer didn't matter, at least not yet. What mattered was that the company survived, the employees were safe, and I had finally reclaimed the power that had been denied to me. The morning after the acquisition, I received calls from employees, clients, and suppliers expressing relief. Everything was stabilizing, exactly as planned. And yet, a part of me couldn't shake the unease. Watching the company thrive under my control was satisfying, but seeing the faces of my parents, who had finally grasped the consequences of their negligence, stirred emotions I hadn't anticipated. They tried to approach me that day, faces a mixture of frustration, disbelief, and a faint glimmer of guilt. My mother's voice was hesitant. We didn't realize the situation was that bad. We thought we could manage it ourselves. I met her gaze steadily, the calm that had guided the execution of the plan now reflecting in my eyes. You didn't realize? Or you didn't care until it affected you personally? My father opened his mouth, then paused, searching for words. We miscalculated. We didn't foresee the extent. Miscalculated. I interrupted. You underestimated the consequences of your choices for years. That's not miscalculation. That's negligence. My brother, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. His tone was defensive, tinged with arrogance, though the cracks in his confidence were evident. It's not like we asked for this to happen. You're making a big deal out of nothing. I let out a slow, deliberate breath. A big deal? Do you remember the years I spent keeping your business afloat while you did this? I gestured vaguely, encompassing all their complacency, their inaction, their reliance on me to carry the weight they refused to lift. Do you remember how easily you threw me aside for appearances while doing nothing yourselves? The room was heavy with silence. I could see the shock settling in. They were realizing, perhaps for the first time, that the child they had dismissed had grown into someone capable of executing a plan far beyond their comprehension. Someone who could protect the innocent while holding them accountable. And yet, as the initial satisfaction began to fade, a different feeling emerged, an almost painful clarity. I had acted strategically, efficiently, and justly in the realm of business. But emotionally, the outcome was more complicated. Seeing them stripped of control, witnessing the consequences of their choices manifest so vividly, stirred conflicting emotions. Relief, vindication, guilt, even a trace of lingering love, all tangled together. Employees whispered in the hallways, some glancing toward my parents with curiosity, others with cautious relief. Clients had resumed their trust in the company, now under my guidance, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of responsibility settle comfortably, not as an obligation, but as an extension of the values I had cultivated. I realized, however, that no amount of strategy could fully erase the personal cost. Relationships were altered irreparably. My parents would never again view me as the obedient child they could manipulate. My brother would never underestimate me again, though I doubted he would ever respect me. And I, in turn, had to confront the truth that victory in business didn't automatically heal the wounds inflicted years ago. By evening, the office had quieted. I sat at my desk, reflecting on the week's events. The company was secure, the employees were safe, and the clients were satisfied. Yet the room felt emptier than it should have. Success, it seemed, had a price. A price measured not in dollars or contracts, but in fractured relationships, lingering resentment, and the quiet ache of a family that could never be what I had once imagined. I understood something crucial that night. Power, justice, and strategy could correct mistakes, but they couldn't restore what had been broken in the past. The fallout was both professional and personal, a testament to the choices I had made and the consequences my parents had ignored. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the hardest judgment was still ahead. Not from the world, not from the employees, and not from the clients. It was from me. The office was quiet that evening, the hum of the city below a distant backdrop to the whirlwind of thoughts in my mind. The company was stable under my control, employees were reassured, and clients were satisfied. On the surface, everything seemed resolved. But internally, I felt a storm of emotions I hadn't anticipated. I reflected on the years I had dedicated to my parents' business. Every late night, every sacrifice, every ounce of effort I had invested had felt, for so long, like a thankless endeavor. Being fired, dismissed, and replaced by my underperforming brother had been a wound I carried silently. Now I had orchestrated a plan that protected the innocent, ensured the company's survival, and held my parents accountable. By business standards, it was flawless. By moral standards, I wasn't so sure. Had I acted out of justice or revenge? The answer was murky. I had preserved jobs and stabilized operations, yet part of me relished seeing my parents confronted with the consequences of their negligence. I thought about my mother, her hesitant apology and shameful glance. My father, grappling with the reality of losing control. My brother, stripped of his comfort and privileges. The satisfaction I felt was undeniable, but was it ethical? I walked around the office, passing rows of desks now humming with renewed productivity. Employees who had once been worried and anxious now smiled and chatted, reassured that their livelihoods were secure. This part of the outcome gave me a sense of peace, yet it was tempered by the knowledge that my actions had irreparably changed my family. The dynamic would never be the same. I thought about forgiveness. Could I forgive them, knowing they had wronged me so profoundly? Could I act with compassion toward the very people who had treated me as disposable? The answer remained elusive. Perhaps forgiveness wasn't about them, it was about me. Letting go of resentment without absolving their mistakes. A hard balance, one I was still learning to strike. Even now, the question lingered. AITA? Was I the asshole for letting the company my parents had ignored and mismanaged fall under my control? Was it wrong to assert my own sense of justice, to protect the employees, and to reclaim power I had been denied? The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't a clear-cut judgment. Life rarely was. I pulled out my laptop and stared at a blank document. The temptation to share my story, to lay bare the years of dedication, betrayal, and strategy, was overwhelming. Maybe it wasn't just a story for myself. It was a story for others, a cautionary tale of loyalty, family, and the consequences of neglect. I began typing slowly, carefully, recounting every detail. The firing, the years of effort, the rise of my own company, the collapse of theirs, the confrontation, and the plan. Every emotion, every calculation, every moral dilemma laid bare. It felt vulnerable but necessary. It felt like an act of closure, a way to examine my choices with honesty, even if only strangers would judge me. As I typed the final sentence, I paused and reread the story. It was raw, emotional, and real. The judgment I sought wasn't just from strangers online, it was from myself. Could I live with the choices I had made? Could I acknowledge the mix of justice, anger, and responsibility that had guided me? The answer, I realized, would define not only my family's story but my own. Tomorrow I would share it. Tomorrow I would ask the world. AITA. The next morning, I sat at my desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard. My story was complete. 10 years of loyalty, betrayal, revenge, and careful strategy distilled into a single post. I stared at the title one last time. AITA for letting my parents' business fail after they fired me? My heart pounded as I clicked post. Within minutes, notifications began trickling in. The story was out there, unfiltered and raw, for strangers to read and judge. The responses came slowly at first. Some were straightforward. NTA. You protected the employees and taught your parents a lesson they desperately needed. They don't get a free pass just because they're family. Others were harsher, questioning the morality of my actions. YTA. Family is supposed to be supported. You could have helped them without taking control. You let resentment dictate your choices. The debate escalated quickly. People dissected every decision I had made. The firing, the rise of my own company, the acquisition, the confrontation, the protection of employees, even the subtle satisfaction I had felt when my parents realized their power was gone. Comments poured in from people who understood the sting of betrayal and from those who believed family should always come first. I read through each one, reflecting on the nuanced perspectives. Some reminded me that justice and revenge often look alike, and that forgiveness and accountability are rarely straightforward. Others argued that my actions were a masterclass in strategy, protecting the innocent while ensuring the guilty faced consequences. Amidst the chaos of opinions, a pattern emerged. Most agreed I had acted rationally, carefully, and with foresight. Many applauded my restraint. After all, I hadn't humiliated my parents publicly, hadn't sabotaged the company for spite, and had safeguarded employees' jobs. Still, a few voices reminded me that ethical dilemmas rarely have perfect solutions. Reading the comments, I felt a strange mixture of relief, validation, and lingering doubt. Perhaps the point wasn't whether I was definitively right or wrong. Perhaps it was the reckoning itself, the process of weighing every consequence, balancing justice with empathy, and accepting the complexity of human relationships. And then, almost poetically, one comment caught my attention. Life isn't about being perfect. It's about making choices you can live with and learning from the ones you can't. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. That was it. That was the truth I had been searching for. I wasn't a hero, nor a villain. I was a person navigating a messy, imperfect world, making choices with the information and principles I had. The story, the Reddit post, the judgments of strangers, they mattered, but they were secondary to my own reckoning. I opened my laptop again and scrolled through the replies. People continued to debate, to empathize, to challenge. Some sympathized with my parents, some with me. Yet in the middle of it all, I realized that the narrative had shifted. It was no longer just about family, betrayal, or business. It was about growth, accountability, and the difficult balance between justice and compassion. In the quiet of that evening, I finally felt a sense of closure. The company was stable, the employees secure, and my parents had faced the consequences of their decisions. I had acted decisively with strategy and integrity. And though the moral questions lingered, I knew I had chosen a path I could live with, one that honored my own principles without destroying the lives of the innocent. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in years I felt free. The judgment was no longer about strangers on the internet or even my parents' approval. It was about me. And in that moment, I realized something essential. Sometimes the hardest choices define who we truly are. I closed my laptop and leaned back, letting the silence of the office wash over me. The storm had passed. The future was uncertain, as it always is. But I had reclaimed control, not just of a company, but of my life. And that, I decided, was enough.